Snow fell thick and relentless across the Colorado waste. An abandoned mill stood silent beside the frozen creek, its will long dead against the black water moving underneath. A lone figure waited in the white clearing, breath fogging in the dying light. Still. Waiting. Behind the bare trees, something shifted. Not the wind. Not an animal. Then the doorway darkened. A man stepped into the open. Slow. Certain. As though he already knew exactly who would be standing there. Farther back came the sound of hooves. More than one pair. Her hand found the cold weight beneath her coat. Fingers tightened around the grip. Did not draw. Not yet. Snow kept falling, soft and endless, burying every track. The silence thickened until it felt alive, pressing in from every side. And the stillness was about to shatter. Larkspur Hollow, Colorado. October, 1879. The stagecoach didn't stop, so much as it surrendered. Wheels groaning. Dust rising in a slow gold curtain around the horses. And Adeline Prescott sat very still inside, hands folded, spine straight, because straight was safer. Straight didn't ache the way slump did. Except it still ached anyway. She waited for the driver to open the door. Counted her breaths. 1. 2. Because counting kept her mind from wandering back to Boston, back to the parlor, back to Silas's shadow falling across the doorway, before his hand ever did. Don't. Not now. The door swung open. Light poured in, too bright, too honest, the kind of light that found every hollow in a person's face, and asked questions. "Miss Prescott?" the driver said. "This here's your stop." She stepped down carefully. Skirts gathered. Boots meeting packed dirt, that smelled of horse, and wood smoke and something green underneath it all, something that might have been sage, or might have been hope, she couldn't tell the difference yet. Larkspur Hollow spread out before her. A single wide street. A mercantile with a striped awning. A church with a white steeple that looked freshly painted, like the town had scrubbed itself clean just for her arrival. Men in dusty hats moved between buildings. A woman swept a porch. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and gave up. Adeline clutched her valise. Small. Light. Because she'd learned to travel light in every sense of the word, learned it the hard way, learned it from a man who used to search her room for things to take from her just to remind her she owned nothing that he didn't allow. Stop. She scanned the street, searching for a face that matched the letters. Elias Hartwell had written 3 of them. Practical sentences. No flowery nonsense. Just land, and cattle, and a house, with 2 good rooms, and an honest offer of shelter in exchange for a wife's work. She'd read those letters until the ink smudged. "Miss Prescott." The voice came from behind her, low, even, unhurried. She turned too fast. Old habit. The kind that comes from years of never wanting to be caught, with her back turned. He was tall. Sun-weathered in a way that spoke of years, not decades, maybe 30, broad through the shoulders, hat in hand out of what looked like genuine courtesy rather than performance. His eyes were the pale gray blue of a sky right before snow. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Elias." He offered it plainly. "Only my mother called me Mr., and she's been gone 11 years. A joke. Or an attempt at one. She didn't quite know how to hold it in her hands yet. "Adeline," she offered back. He nodded once. Studied her face the way a man studies weather, not unkindly, just carefully, like he was trying to read what was coming. "You've had a long ride." "Yes." "Tired?" "A little." "Lie." She was exhausted down to the marrow. 3 weeks of trains, and coaches and strangers' eyes on her, wondering why a woman traveled so far alone, wondering and never asking, which was its own kind of mercy. He reached for her valise. She flinched. Small. Barely a movement. A half-inch pull backward, gone as fast as it came. But he saw it. Something crossed his face. Not pity. She would have hated pity. This was something quieter. Recognition, maybe? He held his hand out, palm up, the way you'd offer a hand to a spooked horse. Waiting. Letting her decide. I've got you, he said. Only if you want me to. She let him take the bag. The wagon ride wasn't to his ranch. Not yet. He explained it plainly, no embarrassment in it, just fact. Widow Prentice will host you till Sunday, he said, flicking the reins. Wouldn't be proper, you staying under my roof, before the vows. Folks here talk. Not unkindly. Just constantly. Adeline almost smiled. Almost. That's considerate of you. It's practical, he said. Then, after a pause. Both things can be true. They rode past the edge of town, past a small cemetery, with white pickets, past a field, where 3 men worked a fence line, hammering posts into hard autumn ground. That's Croft land, Elias said, nodding toward the field. Something flattened in his voice. Just slightly. A door closing somewhere behind his eyes. Croft? Jasper Croft. He said the name like it cost him something to say it. Owns half the county. Wants the other half. And you own the other half? I own enough of it to matter. She looked at him sideways. He didn't elaborate. And she didn't press, because pressing was something Silas used to do to her, dig and dig, until he found the soft place, and then press harder, and she wasn't in the business of doing to others what had been done to her. The wagon rattled on. Prairie grass, gold and endless, rippled under a wind that smelled like the coming of winter. You'll like Mrs. Prentice, Elias said after a while. She talks enough for 2 people. Might take some getting used to. I don't mind talking. Good. A pause. Though I should warn you. She sees things. More than most. Adeline's stomach tightened. What kind of things? He glanced at her. Just once. Just long enough. The kind of things a person tries to hide, he said. Under a sleeve. Or a collar. She looked down at her gloved hands. Said nothing. He didn't push further. Widow Prentice's homestead sat at the crest of a low hill, a sturdy house, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, smoke curling from the chimney in a thin gray ribbon. A woman came out, before the wagon even stopped, wiping her hands on her apron, gray hair pinned up loose, face lined but bright. So you're her, the woman said before Elias had even climbed down. The bride. Adeline Prescott. She offered her hand. Mrs. Prentice took it in both of hers. Warm. Rough. The hands of someone who had worked a life, not watched one. Cornelia Prentice, she said. Everyone just calls me Widow Prentice, which I've stopped correcting, because at my age, arguing with a nickname is a losing battle. She turned Adeline's hand over, glanced at it, released it. You're thinner than your letters made you sound. Cornelia, Elias said, a warning in it, gentle but present. I'm only observing, Elias. A woman's allowed to observe. She waved a hand toward the house. Come in, come in. You must be starved. And exhausted. And in need of a proper bed that doesn't rock beneath you like the whole world's gone to sea. Adeline found herself being ushered inside, before she'd even said goodbye to Elias properly. She turned back once. He stood by the wagon, hat still in his hands, watching her go, with an expression she couldn't name yet. I'll come Sunday morning, he called. 10 o'clock. I'll be ready, she said. And she believed it. Mostly. The house smelled of bread, and beeswax and something floral, dried lavender maybe, tucked into corners. Mrs. Prentice led her to a small room off the kitchen, narrow bed, quilt and faded blues, a single window looking west toward the mountains. It's simple, Mrs. Prentice said. But it's clean, and it's yours till Sunday. It's lovely. And it was. More than lovely. It was quiet. Nobody's footsteps coming down a hallway toward it. Nobody's voice rising through the floorboards. Rest a while, Mrs. Prentice said. I'll have supper on by 6. Adeline sat on the edge of the bed once the door closed. Just sat. Hands in her lap. Breathing. Safe. The word felt foreign in her mouth, even unspoken. Like a language she used to know, and had mostly forgotten. She unpacked slowly. 2 dresses. A nightgown thin from wear. A hairbrush with a cracked handle. And, at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, a small photograph of her parents, taken the year before her mother died, when Adeline was only 9. She held it for a long moment. I made it, she whispered to the photograph. I actually made it. Then she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Turned her head. The bruise along her jaw had faded to a sickly yellow-green, nearly gone now, 3 weeks of healing doing their slow work. But if you knew what to look for, stop. Don't look for it. Nobody's looking for it. Except Mrs. Prentice had looked. That single glance at her hand. That comment about being thinner than her letters sounded. She's already looking, Adeline thought. She already saw something. Adeline pressed her palm flat against the cool glass of the window, and told herself, firmly, the way she'd learned to tell herself things, when the fear started climbing, you are in Colorado. Silas is in Boston. Boston is 1,400 miles away. He does not know where you are. He will never know where you are. She almost believed it. Supper was simple. Stew thick with potatoes, bread still warm enough to steam, when broken open. Mrs. Prentice talked. Constantly. About the town, about the church, about a feud between 2 chicken farmers, that had apparently been going on for 6 years, and showed no signs of resolving. Adeline listened. Let the words wash over her like warm water. It was easier than talking about herself. But Mrs. Prentice wasn't finished being observant. You wince, the older woman said, mid-sentence, mid-bite, like it was simply the next thing on her list of topics. Every time you reach for the bread basket. You wince. Adeline froze. I'm just stiff. From the journey. Mrs. Prentice didn't look convinced. But she let it go. For now. Eat your stew before it goes cold. We've got dress fittings tomorrow, and Sarah Voss doesn't wait for anyone. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did, not truly, not since Boston. Adeline lay in the narrow bed, quilt pulled to her chin, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that wasn't her cousin's house. Wind against the shutters. An owl somewhere distant. No footsteps. No creaking floorboard outside her door. And still her body waited for it. Braced for it. Because 3 years of flinching doesn't undo itself in one safe night. Until, somewhere past midnight, exhaustion won. She dreamed of Boston. Of Silas's study, the smell of pipe smoke, and brandy, his voice low and controlled, the kind of controlled that was worse than shouting, because you never knew which word would be the one that broke the calm. She dreamed of the back stairs. Of counting them in the dark. 14 steps down, and if she was quiet enough, if she was careful enough, she woke with her heart slamming, sheets twisted around her legs. Silence. Just the house. Just the wind. Safe, she told herself again. And this time, for just a moment, she let herself believe it a little more. Morning came gray and cool, sunlight thin through October clouds. Mrs. Prentice had breakfast on the table, before Adeline even finished dressing, eggs and bacon, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Eat, Mrs. Prentice said. We're going to town. Town? Can't marry Elias Hartwell in a dress that's crossed a continent, and looks it. She said it like a fact of nature, like water running downhill. He left money. Said to get you something proper. Man's practical, but he's not cheap about the things that matter. Adeline felt her cheeks warm. That's very generous. He's a generous man. Mrs. Prentice poured coffee, set the cup down, with more force than necessary. Which is exactly why I don't understand why he's still sending away for brides instead of marrying half the eligible women in this county who've been throwing themselves at him for years. Why does he? Mrs. Prentice's face changed. Just slightly. A shadow passing. That's his story, she said. Not mine to tell over breakfast eggs. Adeline didn't push. But she filed it away, the way she filed everything away now, cataloging small mysteries the way another woman might catalog recipes. The mercantile smelled of leather, and coffee beans, and new fabric. The proprietor, a round man named Thomas Delaney, greeted them with the particular warmth of a small town that had already decided to love her before meeting her. So you're Elias's bride, he said, beaming. Whole town's been waiting on you. Waiting? Man's been alone too long, Delaney said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret, though the store was empty. Built that ranch up from nothing. Deserves some happiness. Adeline smiled, unsure what to say to that. Mrs. Prentice was already moving, through bolts of fabric, running her fingers, over blue gingham, over cream lace, muttering to herself about what would suit a bride, with Adeline's coloring. This one, she declared, holding up a deep blue cotton, soft as water. This is the one. They were fitted next door by Sarah Voss, a young widow, with quick hands and a quicker mouth, who took measurements, with practiced efficiency, chattering about the coming winter, about a new shipment of buttons, about anything at all. Until her fingers pressed against Adeline's ribs, and Adeline couldn't quite stop the small gasp. Sarah's eyes flicked up. Concerned. Sorry, she said. Did I? Fell. Mrs. Prentice cut in smoothly, before Adeline could answer. Getting off the stagecoach. City folk aren't used to our steps. Sarah nodded, accepting it, moving on. But Mrs. Prentice caught Adeline's eye across the room. Held it. Said nothing. She knows, Adeline thought. She's known since yesterday. She's just waiting for me to say it myself. Not yet. Please. Not yet. That evening, on the porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl, Mrs. Prentice finally said it. My husband, she began conversationally, like she was talking about the weather, wasn't always a kind man. Adeline's hands stilled over the peas. When we first married, he had a temper. Terrible one. Left marks on me. More than once. Mrs. Prentice didn't look up from her work. Kept shelling. Took me years to understand it wasn't my fault. Took me longer still to stop flinching every time a man raised his voice, within a mile of me. Mrs. Prentice, I recognized the signs, child. Now she looked up. Eyes steady. Kind, but unflinching. The way you hold your ribs. The way you go still, when a door slams. I know it because I lived it. Adeline's throat closed. The peas blurred in the bowl. It wasn't Elias. She managed. If that's what we've only just met, he'd never. I know that. Gently. Plenty of men in this county might raise their voice at a stubborn mule on a bad day, but Elias Hartwell has never once raised a hand to anything smaller than himself, and I've known that boy since he came off a wagon train at 16, with nothing but a busted trunk and a dead man's watch. A pause. But somebody hurt you. Recently. And badly. The dam broke. My cousin, Adeline whispered. Silas. After my father died, I had nowhere else. He took me in and he... Her voice cracked. I never knew what would set him off. A meal not right. A word at the wrong moment. I had to leave. I had to. Mrs. Prentice set down the bowl. Reached over. Covered Adeline's trembling hands with her own weathered ones. You're safe now, she said. Firm. Certain. That man is 1,400 miles away, and Elias Hartwell will burn this whole county down before he lets anyone touch you again. You can't know that. I can, Mrs. Prentice said. Because I watched that boy bury his own sister 5 years back, and I watched what it did to him, and I promise you, Adeline Prescott, he will never, ever become the kind of man who put her in that ground. Adeline stared at her. His sister? Mrs. Prentice's face went somber. Rebecca, she said quietly, that's not my story to finish either. But you'll want to ask him yourself, when you're ready. And he'll tell you, when you're ready to hear it. The wind shifted. Cooler now, carrying the first true bite of the coming winter. Come inside, Mrs. Prentice said, standing, brushing off her apron. Drink some warm milk. Get some rest. Tomorrow we finish that dress. And Sunday. She smiled, small but genuine. Sunday, child, you get married. Saturday evening, Elias came to check on the wedding arrangements. Adeline was setting the table when the wagon pulled up outside, and something in her chest did an odd little skip she wasn't prepared for. He spoke mostly to Mrs. Prentice. Practical matters. The preacher's arrival on the morning stage. A few neighbors invited for a small gathering after the ceremony. But his eyes kept finding Adeline across the room. You'll stay for supper, Mrs. Prentice said. Not really a question. If it's no trouble. It's never trouble, when the man's paying for half the flour in this house. He laughed at that. Low, brief, real. And Adeline found herself smiling despite everything, despite the fear that still lived somewhere under her ribs like a second heartbeat. Through supper, she felt him watching her. Not intrusively. Thoughtfully. Like a man reading a book he suspected had more chapters than it let on. When Mrs. Prentice stepped out to fetch dessert, leaving them briefly alone, he finally spoke directly to her. Second thoughts? He asked. The question startled her. No. Why would you ask that? Big thing, he said. Marrying a stranger. Wouldn't blame you if you were having doubts. Are you? No. Simple. Immediate. I think this can work. For both of us. A pause. But I want you certain. Not just willing. Certain. Adeline looked at him across the table, at the careful, guarded honesty in his face, and something in her chest loosened just slightly. I am, she said. And meant it. I want this marriage, Elias. Something eased in his shoulders. Tension she hadn't fully noticed until it left him. Good, he said quietly. That's good. Sunday dawned clear. Cold, but clear, sunlight cutting sharp lines across frost-silvered grass. Mrs. Prentice helped her into the blue dress, arranged her hair, with careful hands tucked in small white flowers gathered from somewhere Adeline hadn't asked about. You look like spring in the middle of autumn, Mrs. Prentice said, stepping back to admire her work. Then, quieter. He's a lucky man. I think I'm the lucky one, Adeline said. And for the first time in 3 years she believed her own words completely. The church was small, white-steepled, already half full, when they arrived. Reverend Boone, stern-faced but soft-voiced, waited at the front. Thomas Delaney had volunteered to walk her down the short aisle, since she had no father, no brother, no one left to give her away except a shopkeeper, with a kind face, and a town full of strangers who'd already decided to call her one of their own. And there, at the altar, stood Elias. Clean black suit. Hair combed. Face freshly shaved. And his eyes, when they found hers, held something that wasn't quite desire, and wasn't quite relief, but sat somewhere warm between the two. The ceremony was brief. The vows simple. When Reverend Boone pronounced them married, Elias hesitated only a heartbeat, before leaning down, pressing the gentlest kiss to her lips, the first real touch between them beyond a handshake and a steadying arm. Adeline felt it everywhere. Small. Warm. Frightening in how good it felt. The gathering afterward filled the small hotel dining room, with laughter and borrowed chairs, and more food than any two people could eat in a week. Names blurred together. Faces blurred together. But the warmth of the room didn't blur. It settled into her, slow and steady, like sun through a window. By late afternoon, exhaustion crept in, the kind that came from smiling too long, and holding herself too carefully for too many hours. Elias noticed before she said a word. We should get back, he announced to the room. animals to tend. And my wife needs rest, after all this fuss. There were knowing smiles. A few gentle jests, that made her cheeks warm. But soon they were in the wagon, the town falling away behind them, prairie gold and endless under a lowering sun. The silence between them wasn't strained. It was something closer to peace. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hartwell," Elias said, as he helped her down at the ranch, his hands steady, careful, the same careful he'd shown from the very first moment. The name startled her. New. Unfamiliar. Not unwelcome. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," she answered, and something almost like a smile pulled at his mouth. Inside, the ranch house was simple, sturdy, a large main room serving, as kitchen and parlor both, a stone fireplace already laid with kindling. 2 doors led off it. "That one's yours," he said, nodding to the smaller room. "I'll take the other. This marriage doesn't have to be anything you're not ready for. Not yet. Maybe not for a good while." Adeline looked at him. At this man, who had brought her 1,400 miles from fear and was now standing in his own home offering her a locked door, and all the time in the world. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, turned to build up the fire. And Adeline stood in the doorway of her new home, in her new life, in a body that no longer had to brace for footsteps in the hall, and let herself, just for a moment, simply breathe. The weeks that followed found their own rhythm. Elias rose before dawn to tend the cattle. Adeline learned the wood stove's temperament, learned to bake bread that didn't come out like stone, learned the names of the chickens even, though Elias insisted naming chickens was a foolish habit that only made slaughter harder. They ate supper together each evening. Sometimes he read aloud, from one of his handful of books. Sometimes they simply talked, trading pieces of their lives like careful gifts. She learned he'd come west at 16, alone, after his parents died of fever, within days of each other. Learned he'd worked another man's cattle for 4 years, before he'd saved enough to claim his own land. Learned slowly, in pieces offered only, when he was ready to offer them, about a sister named Rebecca. "She married young," he said one evening, staring into the fire rather than at her. "Man seemed decent enough, at first. They always do at first." His jaw tightened. "By the time I understood what was happening in that house, it was too late to fix it." Adeline reached across the space between their chairs. Took his hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I couldn't save her." His voice was rough. "So I promised myself I'd never stand by while it happened to someone else. Never become a man who let it happen. Never become a man who did it." "You never could," Adeline said. Certain of it in a way she was certain of very little else. He looked at her then, something raw and unguarded in his face. "I saw the bruises," he said quietly. "That first day. When you flinched from my hands." Her breath caught. "I didn't say anything," he continued. "Didn't want to shame you. But I need you to know something, Adeline." He turned in his chair, faced her fully. "I will never hurt you. Not in anger. Not in punishment. Not for any reason at all. That is not what a man does to his wife." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I believe you," she whispered. And for the first time, since Boston, she truly did. October gave way to the first bite of November. Frost thickened on the windows each morning. And it was during this stretch of quiet, ordinary days, that Adeline first heard the name that would unravel everything. She'd ridden into town, with Elias for supplies standing at the mercantile counter, while Thomas Delaney tallied their purchases, when the bell above the door jangled, and 2 men walked in, deep in conversation that didn't stop for her presence. Surveyors were out past the Hartwell place again. One man was saying, "3rd time this month." "Croft's persistent, I'll give him that," the other replied. "Man wants that water access bad enough to lie about who's got legal claim to it." Adeline's ears sharpened. "Think he'll try something?" "Jasper Croft's tried something every year since I've known him." Questions never if. Questions when. The men moved further into the store, their conversation dissolving into the general noise of the mercantile. But Adeline stood very still, the words settling into her chest like stones. That night, after supper, she asked Elias directly, "Who is Jasper Croft?" Elias's expression shuddered instantly, that same closing door look she'd seen the first day, riding past the fence line. "Man who owns most of the county," he said carefully. "Wants the rest of it too. Including your land?" A long pause. He set down his fork. "My water rights run through a stretch he claims should have been surveyed as his, back before the county lines were properly drawn. He's been trying to prove it in court for 2 years. Hasn't managed it yet. But he keeps trying. Men like Croft don't stop trying just because they keep losing," Elias said. "They just get more creative about how they lose." Adeline studied him across the table. "You should have told me. Wasn't your burden to carry. Not on top of everything else. Elias." She said his name firmly, the way she was still learning to say things firmly, still practicing the shape of a voice that got to have opinions and expect them to matter. "I'm your wife. Whatever burden this ranch carries, I carry it too now. That's what married means." Something shifted in his face. Surprise, maybe? Or something warmer than surprise. "All right," he said quietly. "Then you should know the whole of it. Croft's had surveyors out 3 times this month alone. He's building towards something. I just don't know what yet." Adeline felt a small cold seed of unease plant itself somewhere beneath her ribs. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. But something close enough to recognize the family resemblance. Mid-November brought an early storm, driving rain that turned to sleet by nightfall, wind screaming around the corners of the house like something wounded. Elias had been out since dawn helping the Delaney's move cattle, before the worst of it hit, and Adeline spent the afternoon pacing, starting at every gust, praying for the sound of hooves in the yard. When it finally came, she nearly wept with relief. He came through the door soaked through, shivering, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Elias," she said. "Come in quickly, you're freezing." He allowed himself to be led, which told her more than words could have how spent he truly was. She built the fire high, hauled water for a bath, moved through the kitchen, with a competence that surprised even herself. By the time he emerged from his room in dry clothes, the tub was steaming, the kitchen warm, with firelight, and the smell of stew reheating on the stove. "Never been so glad to see 4 walls and a roof," he admitted, lowering himself into the water, with a grateful groan. Adeline busied herself at the stove, back turned, though she was acutely aware of him behind her, of the intimacy of the moment. A married couple, alone, the storm howling outside like it wanted in. "Lost 2 calves in the creek," he said, voice weary. "Anderson broke his arm when his horse went down. Will he be all right? Doc thinks so." A pause. Water shifting. "Made me think, though. If something happened to me out there, you'd be alone here." Adeline turned. Found him watching her, water beaded on his shoulders, hair dark and curling with damp. "I'm stronger than I look," she said. "I know that." His voice was quiet. "Certain. Doesn't stop me worrying." Something warm bloomed in her chest, unfamiliar, unpracticed. Being worried over. Being wanted safe not out of obligation, but out of something that was starting, slowly, cautiously, to look like love. When he finished bathing, and they sat to eat, his hands still stiff with cold, she reached across the table, without thinking, and took them in hers, rubbing warmth back into his fingers. He went still. Surprised. "Your hands are ice," she said, suddenly self-conscious, but not releasing him. A slow smile crossed his face. "Feel warmer already," he said softly. They stayed like that a long moment. Hands joined. Something unspoken passing between them, quiet and certain, as the fire crackling beside them. "Food's getting cold," he said eventually. Reluctantly. And you went to all this trouble. But neither of them moved for another few seconds. Neither of them wanted to. That night, lying in her narrow bed listening to the storm still howling beyond the window, Adeline found herself thinking of his hands in hers. Of the warmth that had passed between them, that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time, she let herself consider it. Really consider it. That this arrangement, born of desperation, and an advertisement in a matrimonial paper, might become something else entirely. The thought frightened her. And thrilled her. Both, at once, the way the truest things always seem to arrive. Late November brought a letter. Elias returned from town, with the mail pressed flat against his chest, protecting it from a light snow that had started falling that morning, the first real snow of the season, transforming the prairie into something pale and hushed and new. "Something for you," he said, handing her a single envelope. Adeline's stomach dropped before she even saw the handwriting, because she recognized it immediately. That careful, cramped script. The way the letters leaned forward like they were straining to escape the page. Silas. "Adeline?" Elias's voice, somewhere far away. "You've gone pale." She stared at the envelope in her hands. Didn't open it. Couldn't, not yet, not with her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape her body entirely. "It's from my cousin," she managed. Elias went very still. "He knows where you are." "I don't know how." Her voice shook. "I never told him. I never told anyone in Boston where I... Except she had told someone. A single letter, months ago, to an old family friend of her mother's, asking after a piece of correspondence, mentioning only in passing that she'd be marrying and moving west. A small mention. A tiny thread. But threads, once pulled, unravel entire garments. "Open it," Elias said quietly. "Whatever it says, we face it together." Adeline's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was short. Deliberately, carefully short, the way Silas always wrote, when he wanted his words to land like blows. "Dear cousin, it has come to my attention that you have settled in Colorado, and entered into marriage. I write with concern for your well-being, and with certain family matters that require your attention regarding your father's estate. I intend to visit you personally to discuss these matters, as they cannot be resolved through correspondence alone. I shall arrive before the new year. Your affectionate cousin, Silas." Adeline read it twice. 3 times. The words swimming, rearranging themselves into shapes that made her chest constrict. "He's coming here," she whispered. Elias took the letter from her trembling hands, read it himself, his jaw tightening with every line. "Family matters regarding the estate," he read aloud, voice flat. "What estate?" "My father left money," Adeline said slowly, memory surfacing through fear like something rising from dark water. "Not much. But something. Silas managed it, after father died, said it was tied up in the courts, said there wasn't enough to matter." She looked up at Elias, understanding dawning cold and sharp. "He's been lying. He must have been lying. There was money, and he's been keeping it, and now he's afraid I'll..." "Afraid you'll what?" "I don't know. Tell someone. Ask questions. I never thought to ask before. I was too afraid of him to ask him anything at all." Elias set the letter on the table, with careful deliberateness, like a man setting down something that might otherwise be thrown. "He's not touching you again," he said. Quiet. Absolute. "Whatever he wants. Whatever he's hiding. He is not touching you again, Adeline. I promise you that. You can't promise that. You don't know him. I know men like him." Elias's eyes were hard now, the softness she'd grown used to hardened into something else entirely, something that made her understand, suddenly, why Jasper Croft's surveyors kept losing their nerve on Hartwell Land. Men who hurt people smaller than themselves, and call it love. Men who mistake fear for respect. He met her eyes. I buried my sister because a man like that got to her before anyone stopped him. It will not happen again. Not in this house. Not to you." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, blanketing the yard in pale, deceptive quiet. Because that's what snow did, Adeline thought distantly. It covered things. Smoothed them over. Made the world look peaceful right up, until you stepped through the crust and found the hard, frozen ground underneath. Silas was coming. And somewhere out past the fence line, Jasper Croft's surveyors were still measuring land that wasn't theirs, building towards something Elias still didn't fully understand. Two threats, converging from different directions, and Adeline standing in the middle of both, no longer the frightened woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach, with bruises hidden beneath her sleeves. She looked at the letter on the table. At her husband's face, steady and fierce beside her. "Before the new year," she said quietly, reading Silas's words again in her mind. "That doesn't give us much time." "No," Elias agreed. "It doesn't." Outside, the wind picked up, driving snow against the windows in soft, insistent waves. And somewhere, 1,400 miles east, a man who had once controlled every hour of her days was already making arrangements. Already packing a trunk. Already writing to men who owed him favors, men who might help him find leverage over a woman he still believed belonged to him. He did not know yet what he was walking into. He did not know that the frightened girl who'd fled Boston had found, in this small ranch house on the Colorado Prairie, something she'd never once possessed under his roof. A husband who would not look away. A neighbor who saw what others missed. And slowly, cautiously, a strength of her own, that no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. The letter sat on the table between them, innocent as paper, heavy as a verdict. Adeline reached out and folded it closed. "Let him come," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Snow came harder now. Not the soft, forgiving kind that dusted rooftops, and made the world look gentle. The other kind. The kind that meant business. It piled against the fence posts in white drifts, buried the wagon ruts, turned the road, into town into something you crossed at your own risk. Adeline stood in the yard, rifle raised, squinting down the barrel at a row of bottles lined up on the fence rail 40 feet away. "Breathe out," Elias said behind her. "Close. Steady. Then squeeze. Don't yank." She breathed out. Squeezed. The shot cracked across the frozen air, and the second bottle, from the left, exploded into glittering fragments. "There," Elias said, something like pride threading through the single word. "There it is." Adeline lowered the rifle, heart still hammering, breath fogging white in front of her face. "I hit it." "You hit it." "I've never hit anything in my life." "You have now." She turned to look at him, and something passed between them, small and warm despite the cold, despite the gray sky pressing low overhead, despite the letter still folded in the drawer of her nightstand, the one that said, "Before the new year," in handwriting she'd once known better than her own. Because that letter hadn't left her mind. Not once. Not even now, with a rifle in her hands, and her husband's approval settling over her like something she could almost trust. "Again," Elias said, handing her another round. She loaded it the way he'd shown her. Hands steadier than they'd been a month ago. Steadier than they'd been in years, if she was honest. And she was trying to be honest now. With herself, if nobody else. Jasper Croft's men were back on the boundary line 2 days later. Elias rode out at dawn, jaw tight, saying little. Adeline watched him go, from the porch, coffee cooling in her hands, breath clouding the cold air. He came back at noon. Face like a closed door. "Well?" she asked. "Surveyors again." He swung down from his horse, movements clipped, controlled in a way that told her the control was costing him something. Except this time they'd already driven stakes. "On my side of the creek." "Can they do that?" "They can do whatever they think they can get away with." He led the horse toward the barn, and she followed, because whatever this was, she wasn't going to let him carry it alone. Told them to pull the stakes. Told them politely. And they pulled them. A pause. Eventually. Elias. It's handled, Adeline. It doesn't sound handled. It sounds like the beginning of something. He stopped. Turned to look at her, snow settling on his shoulders, on the brim of his hat. You're not wrong, he admitted. Quiet. Croft's building towards something. I still don't know what. But he's getting bolder. Which means whatever's coming, it's coming soon. Soon. The word landed in her chest next to another word. Before the new year. 2 storms, gathering from opposite directions. And Adeline standing in the space between them, learning to load a rifle, learning to breathe out, before she squeezed, learning that safety wasn't a place you arrived at and stayed. It was something you built. Every single day. Brick by brick. Whether the walls wanted to hold or not. He came on a Tuesday. Adeline was at the Mercantile, choosing thread for a quilt she'd started, half listening to Thomas Delaney complain about a shipment of nails that hadn't arrived, when the bell above the door rang. And something in her went cold, before she even turned around. Because she knew that walk. She'd know that walk anywhere, in any crowd, in any lifetime. The particular way he entered a room like he already owned it. Like the air itself owed him deference. Silas Prescott stood in the doorway of the Larkspur Hollow Mercantile, snow dusting the shoulders of an expensive black coat, hat in hand, smiling the smile she'd learned to fear more than his shouting ever was. Because shouting, at least, was honest. "Cousin," he said. "There you are." The thread spool fell from her hand. Rolled across the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up. "Silas." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Barely. You look well." His eyes moved over her, cataloging, the way they always had, searching for the crack he could work his fingers into. "Colorado agrees with you. What are you doing here? I wrote you a letter. Did you not receive it?" "I received it." She forced her hands still at her sides. "It said family matters?" "What matters, Silas?" His smile widened. Didn't reach his eyes. Never had. "Business best discussed privately, don't you think?" He glanced past her, to Thomas Delaney, who was watching this exchange, with the careful blankness of a man deciding whether to intervene. "Not in a shop, in front of strangers. They're not strangers to me." "No," Silas said, something sharpening beneath the pleasantness. "I suppose they wouldn't be. You've made yourself quite at home here." The bell above the door rang again. And Elias walked in. Adeline felt the room shift, before she even saw his face. Felt the temperature of it change, the way air changes right before lightning. Elias crossed the store in 4 long strides. Stopped beside her. Didn't touch her, didn't need to, his presence alone doing the work of a hand at her back. "Mr. Prescott," he said. Flat. "I take it. Elias Hartwell." Silas extended a hand. "My cousin's husband. What a pleasure, finally." Elias looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Didn't take it. Silas let it fall unbothered, like the refusal was simply data he'd file away for later. "I've come regarding family business," Silas said. "Matters concerning her father's estate. Legal complexities, nothing that need concern you directly." "She's my wife," Elias said. "Anything concerning her concerns me." "How modern." Silas's smile thinned. "Well, perhaps we might discuss it, as a family, then. Somewhere more private." "No," Adeline said. Both men turned to look at her. "Whatever you have to say," she said, and her voice, to her own surprise, did not shake. "You can say here. Or you can say it at the ranch, in front of my husband. But I am done having private conversations with you, Silas. That ended the day I got on that stagecoach." Something flickered across Silas's face. Fast. Gone almost before it arrived. But she'd seen it. Recognized it. The particular twitch of a man used to being obeyed, encountering, for the first time, a woman who no longer intended to obey. "As you wish," he said smoothly. "Too smoothly. I'll call at the ranch tomorrow, then. We can discuss the estate matters properly." He replaced his hat. Nodded to Thomas Delaney. At the door, he paused. Looked back. "It really is good to see you well, Adeline," he said. "I worried about you. After you left so suddenly. Without a word to anyone." The words landed exactly where he meant them to land. A small, precise blade, disguised as concern. Adeline said nothing. The bell rang again, as he left, snow swirling in behind the closing door. For a long moment, nobody in the shop moved. "Well," Thomas Delaney finally said, into the silence. "He seems pleasant." Nobody laughed. That night, Adeline told Elias everything. Not the fragments she'd offered before. All of it. The years after her father's death, moving into Silas's house, because there was nowhere else to go. The rules that changed without warning. The silences that stretched for days, when she displeased him in some way she never quite understood, until it was too late. The nights she'd learned to count the stairs in the dark. Elias sat across from her at the kitchen table, hands folded, jaw tight, listening without interrupting, though she could see what it cost him to stay still. "He controlled the money," she said. "After father died. Said the estate was complicated, tied up, that there wasn't much left once the debts were settled. I never questioned it. I was too afraid of him to question anything. And now he's here. Now he's here." She wrapped her hands around a cooling cup of tea, more for something to hold than any desire to drink it. "Talking about estate matters. Which means either there's more money than he told me, or there's some other reason he needs me to sign something. Or say something. Or," her voice caught, "I don't know, Elias. I don't know what he wants. I only know he wants something, and men like Silas don't travel 1,400 miles for nothing." Elias reached across the table. Took her hand. "Careful. Steady. Whatever it is," he said, "we face it together. Tomorrow, when he comes, you will not be alone in that room. He'll try to isolate us. He always finds a way to isolate people. He can try. Elias." "I buried my sister," Elias said, quiet, final. "Because a man like him got her alone one too many times, and by the time anyone noticed the pattern, it was too late to break it." His grip tightened, gentle but sure. "I am not leaving you alone in a room with that man. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Adeline felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain. The opposite of pain. Something that had been clenched shut for years, easing, just slightly, just enough to let a little light through. "Thank you," she whispered. He lifted her hand. Pressed his lips to her knuckles, brief and warm. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll need our wits." She didn't sleep much. But for once, it wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was something closer to resolve. Silas arrived at 11 the next morning, driving a rented buggy up the frozen ranch road, with the confidence of a man who never once doubted he'd be welcomed. He wasn't. Elias met him in the yard. Didn't invite him past the porch, until Adeline appeared in the doorway, and even then, the invitation came grudging, more courtesy than warmth. Inside, Silas took the offered chair, glanced around the main room, with an expression Adeline recognized instantly. Assessment. Cataloging. The same look he used to give her father's house, before the funeral flowers had even wilted. "Modest," he said. "But comfortable, I suppose, for what it is." "Say what you came to say," Elias said. He remained standing, positioned near Adeline's chair, arms crossed, patience visibly thinning. Silas's smile flickered but held. "Very well." He reached into his coat, withdrew a folded document, set it on the table between them. "Your father's estate, Adeline, was more substantial than I let on at the time. I confess I managed certain funds on your behalf, believing you too young, too unsettled, to handle such matters yourself. You mean you stole them? Adeline said. I mean I managed them. His voice hardened, just slightly, the pleasant mask slipping a fraction. And I've come to settle accounts properly. There remains a sum, held in trust, which requires your signature to release. I've brought the necessary paperwork. He slid the document across the table. Adeline didn't touch it. Why now? She asked. Why suddenly, after 3 years, does this money require my signature? Legal complexities, Silas said smoothly. The trust matures. Requires the beneficiary's authorization to transfer. Show it to me, Elias said, reaching for the document, before Adeline could. Silas's hand shot out. Covered the paper. This is a family matter, he said. Between myself and my cousin. She's my wife, Elias said again, voice low, dangerous in its evenness. Show me the document. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas withdrew his hand. Let Elias take the paper. Elias read it slowly. Adeline watched his face change. As he did, the careful blankness giving way, gradually, to something sharper. This isn't a release of funds, Elias said finally. This is a transfer of power of attorney over all remaining assets. Signed over to you. A formality, Silas said quickly. Given the distance, given the complexity of managing an estate across territories, it simply makes more sense for you to control everything she owns, Elias finished. Again. Silas's composure cracked, just slightly, a hairline fracture in the smooth surface. You misunderstand, he said. I only wish to help. Adeline has never been equipped to handle financial matters, she never has been, she's always been prone to. To what? Adeline's voice cut through the room, sharp and clear. Finish that sentence, Silas. I'd genuinely like to hear it. He looked at her. Something calculating flickering behind his eyes, recalculating, adjusting for a version of her he apparently hadn't accounted for. Fragile, he said finally. Softer than before. Almost gentle, in the way a trap is gentle right up, until it closes. You've always been fragile, Adeline. Emotionally. It's not a fault. It's simply who you are. I only ever wanted to protect you from burdens you weren't suited to carry. The room went very still. Adeline stood. I am not signing anything, she said. Not today. Not ever, without seeing every ledger, every account, every document related to my father's estate since the day he died. And you will provide those documents, Silas, or I will find another way to see them. Adeline. I am done being managed, she said. I am done being protected into silence. You will leave now. For a moment, something ugly surfaced in Silas's face. Fast. There and gone. The mask of concerned family sliding, just for an instant, revealing the man underneath, the one who used to search her room, who used to press, and press until he found the soft place. Then it smoothed over again. He stood. Retrieved the document Elias still held, folded it carefully back, into his coat. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. I came here in good faith. You came here because you're afraid I'll ask questions, Adeline said. And you're right to be afraid. Silas's eyes flicked to Elias. Back to Adeline. I'll be staying in Larkspur Hollow a while longer, he said. Give you time to reconsider. Time to remember, which of us has always looked after you. A pause, deliberate, cruel in its softness. It really would be so much easier, Adeline, if you simply trusted me the way you used to. I never trusted you, Adeline said. I was afraid of you. There's a difference, and I only just learned it. Silas's jaw tightened. He replaced his hat. Good day, he said, and left without another word, boots hard against the porch boards, buggy wheels crunching away through the snow. Elias moved to stand beside her, close, solid, silent for a long moment. You were magnificent, he said finally. Adeline let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 3 years. I was terrified, she admitted. That's what magnificent looks like sometimes. He took her hand. Terrified, and doing it anyway. Silas didn't leave Larkspur Hollow. He took a room at the hotel. Started appearing in places he had no reason to appear. The Mercantile. The church on Sunday, sitting 3 rows back, watching. The sheriff's office, where he spent an increasing amount of time, according to Thomas Delaney, who made it his business to know such things. Sweet-talking Kettering, Delaney told Elias, low-voiced, over the counter one afternoon, while Adeline browsed fabric nearby, close enough to hear. Buying him coffee. Asking a lot of questions about you, Elias. About the ranch. About your wife. What kind of questions? Delaney's face creased with discomfort. The kind that don't sound friendly, however friendly he makes them sound. That evening, Sheriff Amos Kettering rode out to the ranch himself. He was a solid man, gray at the temples, the kind of weathered calm that came from 20 years of settling other people's disputes. He sat his horse at the edge of the yard, hat brim low against the falling snow, and didn't dismount right away. Elias, he said. Mrs. Hartwell. Sheriff. Elias's voice carried a wariness Adeline had learned to recognize. Something wrong? Kettering's jaw worked, like the words tasted bad going down. Got a formal complaint filed this morning, he said. Against your wife. Adeline felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her. What kind of complaint? She managed. Theft, Kettering said. From a family estate back east. Filed by a Mr. Silas Prescott, claiming he's the rightful executor of your father's will, and that funds went missing around the time you left Boston. The world narrowed to a single point of cold, sharp focus. That's a lie, Adeline said. He's the one who stole from the estate. I only just learned it myself. I don't doubt you, Kettering said, and something in his voice suggested he genuinely meant it. But a complaint's a complaint. I've got to look into it proper. The law's the law, even out here. He shifted in the saddle, clearly uncomfortable with his own errand. I'll need you to come into town. Answer some questions. Formally. When? Tomorrow, if you're able. Elias stepped forward, something hard settling into his voice. This is harassment, Amos. You know it as well as I do. I know a man filed a legal complaint, Kettering said, and I know I've got a job to do whether I like the man who filed it or not. His eyes moved to Adeline, softer now. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell. Truly. But it's got to be done proper, or it'll only give him more grounds to make noise. Best to answer it head on. Clear your name outright. Adeline swallowed hard. I'll come, she said. Tomorrow morning. Because there was nothing else to do. Because running would only look like guilt. Because she had spent years running, and she was done running now, whatever it cost her. Kettering nodded, touched his hat, and rode back toward town, through the thickening snow. Elias turned to her, fury and worry warring across his face. He's building a case, he said. Against you. That's what this is. That estate business, that was just the opening move. I know, Adeline said, and her voice, to her own surprise, was steady. So I'll need to build one back. She didn't sleep that night. But she didn't spend the hours afraid either. She spent them thinking. Because if Silas had come 1,400 miles, with a forged document, and a fabricated accusation, he hadn't done it on instinct. Men like Silas didn't act on instinct. They planned. Which meant somewhere there was a plan. A reason. A thread that, if pulled hard enough, would unravel the whole fabricated garment he was trying to drape over her. Think, Adeline. Think like he thinks. Her father's estate. The money he claimed didn't exist, and then, suddenly, claimed did exist, requiring her signature. Which meant one of two things. Either the money had genuinely been sitting somewhere, growing, waiting to be claimed. Or there was no money at all, and this was never about funds to release. It was about control. About making her sign something, anything, that gave Silas legal standing over her again. And if a fabricated theft accusation could pressure her into signing quickly, quietly, just to make the noise stop, that's it, she thought, sitting up in the dark, heart hammering with something that wasn't quite fear anymore. That's exactly it. He's not trying to win a court case. He's trying to scare me into signing before there ever is one. She lit a candle, found paper, began writing down everything she remembered. Every account her father had mentioned before he died. Every visit from lawyers she'd been too young, too grieving, to fully understand. Every offhand comment Silas had made, over 3 years that, taken alone, meant nothing, but taken together, there. A pattern emerging, from the dark like a photograph developing. The sheriff's office in Larkspur Hollow was small. A single room, a stove in the corner, a desk cluttered with papers, a back room with 2 empty cells that mostly held drunks on Saturday nights. Silas was already there when Adeline and Elias arrived, seated with an ease that suggested he'd been comfortable in this room for some time. He stood as they entered, inclined his head with performed politeness. "Cousin," he said. "Elias." Sheriff Kettering gestured them to chairs. Cleared his throat. "This is informal," he said. "For now. Just gathering facts. Mr. Prescott, you want to state your complaint again, for the record?" Silas folded his hands, composed his face into an expression of reluctant sorrow. "It pains me to be here," he began. "Adeline is family. But her father's estate was left in my care, and shortly before she departed for Colorado, certain funds went missing. Nearly $400. I have documentation." He produced a folder, set it on the desk. "Bank withdrawals, timed within days of her departure." Kettering opened the folder, scanned the pages, brow furrowing. Adeline's chest tightened. Because the documents looked real. Looked official, stamped, signed. Because Silas had always been careful. That was the thing about him nobody outside that house ever understood. He wasn't just cruel. He was meticulous. "Mrs. Hartwell," Kettering said, "you want to respond?" Adeline took a breath. Steadied it. "Those withdrawals," she said, "if they exist, were not made by me. I left Boston with less than $60 to my name, which I can account for entirely through the cost of my passage west. I never had access to my father's accounts. Silas controlled them exclusively, from the day of the funeral onward." "Convenient," Silas said softly. "Bet she'd say so now." "Not nearly as convenient," Adeline shot back, "as you appearing 1,400 miles from home, 3 years after my father's death, the very same week you attempted to have me sign over power of attorney for the remainder of an estate you claimed for years had nothing left in it." Kettering's eyes lifted from the folder, sharpened. "That true?" he asked Silas. "You brought a power of attorney document. Same visit?" Silas's composure flickered. "A separate matter," he said. "Unrelated administrative." "Doesn't sound unrelated," Kettering said. "I have the document," Elias said, cutting in. "Copied it before he took it back. If you'd like to see the actual language, Sheriff." Silas's jaw tightened, the first true crack Adeline had seen since he'd walked into the mercantile. "This is absurd," he said. "I came here out of concern for my cousin's well-being, and I find myself accused of—" "Nobody's accused you of anything," Kettering said mildly. "Yet." He closed the folder. "I'll need time to verify these bank records. Send inquiries back east. That'll take weeks, maybe longer, this time of year, with the passes half buried." He looked between them, weighing something. "Until then, nobody's under arrest, nobody's cleared. Just a matter under investigation." "Weeks," Silas repeated, something tightening in his voice. "Surely that's not necessary. The evidence is quite clear." Evidence is only as clear as it turns out to be once I've checked it, Kettering said. That's how this works, Mr. Prescott. Out here same as back east. Silas stood. Smoothed his coat. The mask sliding back into place with visible effort. Of course, he said. Take whatever time you need, Sheriff. I only want the truth to come out. So do I, Adeline said quietly. That makes two of us, at least. Silas's eyes met hers. Something cold passed between them, unspoken, unmistakable. This isn't over, his eyes said. No, hers answered. It isn't. Word traveled fast in a town the size of Larkspur Hollow. By the time Adeline and Elias returned from the sheriff's office, whispers had already begun their slow crawl through the general store, the church steps, the counters of the hotel dining room. Heard there's some question about the new Mrs. Hartwell. Money troubles back east. Her own cousin, filing charges. Must be something to it. Wonder what she was running from, coming all this way alone. Adeline felt the eyes on her at the Mercantile 2 days later. Felt conversation stop, just slightly, just enough to notice, as she walked past. Sarah Voss, at least, remained warm, pressing her hand as she measured fabric. Don't you mind them, Sarah said low, fierce. Small towns love nothing better than a fresh rumor to chew on. It'll pass. Will it? Adeline asked. Or will it just wait for the next thing to attach itself to? Sarah didn't have an answer for that. Neither did Adeline. Because rumors, she was learning, didn't need truth to survive. They only needed repetition. And Silas understood that better than anyone. That evening, Widow Prentice came to the ranch, letting herself in, without knocking, the way she'd started doing over the past weeks, family enough now to skip the formality. But her face, when Adeline saw it, carried something heavier than a social visit. I need to tell you something, Cornelia Prentice said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table, hands twisting in her lap. Before you hear it from someone else, and think worse of me than I already think of myself. Adeline sat across from her, unease coiling low in her stomach. What is it? That letter, Cornelia said. The one from your Boston connections, the one I mentioned once, about your mother's old friend. What about it? I wrote her back, Cornelia said, voice small. Months ago. Before your wedding, even. She'd written asking, after you said she'd heard rumors you'd left Boston in a hurry, and Her hands twisted tighter. I told her you were safe. That you'd married a good man in Colorado. I thought I was easing an old friend's worry, Adeline. I didn't know, I swear to you, I didn't know she'd tell anyone else. I didn't know that letter would ever find its way to him. The room tilted, just slightly, understanding arriving in slow, sickening pieces. You told her where I was. I didn't know. Cornelia said again, tears rising now, genuine, wretched. I would never have breathed a word, if I'd known what he was. I thought I was doing a kindness. Adeline sat very still. Felt something complicated rising in her chest, anger and understanding tangled together, so tightly she couldn't separate one from the other. Because Cornelia hadn't meant harm. Cornelia, who had seen her bruises before anyone else, who had held her hand and told her she was safe, who had shelled peas beside her on a porch and offered up her own old wounds, so Adeline wouldn't feel so alone in hers. But meaning no harm didn't undo the harm done. I need a moment, Adeline said, voice tight. Cornelia nodded, wiping her eyes, standing to give her space, moving toward the door. I understand if you can't forgive this right away, she said quietly. I'm not sure I've forgiven myself yet either. The door closed behind her, and Adeline sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, feeling the fragile new architecture of her trust shift and groan under unexpected weight. She didn't mean it. She didn't mean it. But he's here anyway. He's here, and it's because of a kindness that turned into a key, and now I don't know who else's kindness might turn into a key someday, and if I can't trust that, then what can I stop? Elias found her there an hour later, still sitting, still staring, the candle burned low. He didn't ask what happened. Cornelia must have told him on her way out. He simply sat beside her. Took her hand. Waited. I don't blame her, Adeline finally said. Not really. Not in the part of me that thinks clearly. But it's hard, she admitted, to build walls back up around trust once they've been shown to have a door in them nobody meant to leave open. She looked at him. How do I keep trusting people, Elias? How do I keep letting people in, when even the kindest ones can be the crack that lets him through? Elias considered the question seriously. The way he considered everything. You don't stop trusting people, he said finally. You just get wiser about what you tell them, and when. That's not the same as building walls. That's just learning the shape of your own doors. He squeezed her hand. Cornelia loves you. That letter came from love, even if it went somewhere love never intended. That's different from what Silas does. His comes from something else entirely. Adeline let out a long, shaking breath. I know, she said. I just needed a moment to feel the difference, before I could believe it. Take all the moments you need, Elias said. I'm not going anywhere. 3 days later, snow still falling in soft, relentless waves, Elias rode out to check the fence line along Croft's disputed boundary, and didn't come back by dusk. Adeline paced the kitchen, old fear rising in familiar, unwelcome waves, the specific terror of waiting for a man who should have been home an hour ago. He's fine. He's fine. This is different. This isn't Boston. Nobody's punishing you for the hour growing late. He's just, except what if Croft's men, except what if the storm stop. Breathe. Think. A ranch dog named Copper, who'd adopted them sometime in November, began barking at the door. Adeline threw it open, and there was Elias, dismounting stiffly, snow cake thick on his shoulders, a graze along his temple, that hadn't been there this morning. You're hurt, she said, already moving toward him. It's nothing. Elias. Croft's men, he said, allowing her to pull him inside, to press a cloth to the graze, to fuss over him in a way that, weeks ago, he might have brushed off. He didn't brush it off now. Found 4 of them driving new stakes past the creek. Told them to stop. One of them didn't care for being told. He hit you? Tried to. A grim, small satisfaction crossed his face. Didn't manage it twice. Adeline's hands weren't quite steady, as she cleaned the wound. This is escalating, she said. First surveyors. Now this. I know. What does Croft actually want, Elias? Truly want. Not the water rights story. What's underneath it? Elias was quiet for a long moment, staring into the middle distance, some calculation working behind his eyes. There's talk, he said slowly, of a rail spur coming through this county inside the next 2 years. Nothing official yet. But if it's true, and if it crosses anywhere near my water access. He looked at her. Land along a rail line's worth 10 times what it's worth today. Croft's not fighting me over cattle water, Adeline. He's fighting me over what this land could become. The pieces shifted in Adeline's mind, slow and cold, into a shape she didn't like at all. And Silas, she said. Silas is here about money too. About the estate. She paused. What if it's not 2 separate storms, Elias? What if it's one? Elias's eyes sharpened. Explain. I don't have it fully yet, Adeline admitted. But think about it. Silas needs money. He's been embezzling for years, and eventually embezzled money runs out, or someone starts asking questions. What if he's not just here to control me? What if he's here because someone offered him something in exchange for pressure on you? On us. Croft. It fits, Adeline said, urgency building now. Silas shows up right, as Croft's surveyors get bolder. Silas tries to force a legal complication onto our marriage, onto this household, right as Croft needs some kind of leverage over your land claim. What if they've found each other, Elias? What if they're working together? Elias sat back, the graze on his temple forgotten, something dark and focused settling over his features. If that's true, he said slowly, then this isn't two problems anymore. No, Adeline agreed. It's one very determined enemy, wearing two different faces. She began looking for proof the very next morning. Not recklessly. Carefully. The way Silas himself had taught her to move through a house, without disturbing its surfaces, though he taught her that skill for entirely different reasons. She started at the county land office in Larkspur Hollow, requesting to see the original survey records for the Hartwell property, the documents filed when Elias first claimed the land 9 years prior. The clerk, a nervous young man named Ferris, hesitated. Those records, he said. Some of them were pulled for review. Recent request. Legal matter, apparently. Whose request? Ferris glanced around, lowered his voice. Wasn't supposed to say. But it was Mr. Croft's lawyer. Filed a claim disputing the original boundary survey. Said there was an error in the original filing, back when your husband first registered the land. Can I see what was pulled? I can show you what's left, Ferris said. Copies exist, usually, in the State Archive in Denver. But the originals filed here, those are what's missing. Adeline's pulse quickened. Missing how? Checked out for review, Ferris said. 3 weeks ago. Not yet returned. By whom? Ferris hesitated again, longer this time, glancing toward the door, as though worried someone might overhear. I really shouldn't. Please, Adeline said. This concerns my husband's entire livelihood, Mr. Ferris. Whatever's happening, I think you already suspected isn't right. Something in her voice must have landed, because Ferris exhaled, defeated, and reached beneath the counter for a ledger. Sign out record, he said, turning it toward her, pointing to a line near the bottom. The signature was cramped. Careful. Slanted forward like the letters were straining to escape the page. S. Prescott. Adeline stared at it. Felt the world tilt, click, and lock into a new and terrible shape. He's not just building a case against me, she whispered. He's helping Croft steal the land out from under Elias. She rode home faster than she'd ever ridden anything, snow flying up behind the horse's hooves, cold burning her lungs, urgency driving her past caution entirely. Elias met her in the yard, alarmed by her speed. What happened? Silas checked out the original survey documents, she said, breathless, dismounting without waiting for help. 3 weeks ago. From the county office. The ones that would prove your original boundary claim. Elias went very still. 3 weeks, he said slowly. He hadn't even shown his face in town 3 weeks ago. He must have been here longer than any of us knew, Adeline said, the realization settling cold in her stomach. Watching. Planning. Before he ever walked into that mercantile and made a show of finding me by surprise. Show me, Elias said. They rode back into town together, straight to the land office, where Ferris confirmed the record again, more openly this time, with Elias standing beside her, his presence lending weight the young clerk clearly respected. If those documents don't come back, Ferris said carefully, or if they come back altered, there's very little I can do about it, after the fact. Once they're removed from the file, we're relying on whoever removed them to return them honestly. And if they don't? Elias asked. Then Croft's lawyer files his boundary dispute, Ferris said, and there's no original document to contradict whatever new version gets filed instead. The full shape of it settled over Adeline like ice water. Silas didn't need to win a case against her. He never had. He only needed to stall her long enough, distract her long enough, occupy the household with one crisis, while he quietly erased the evidence that stood between Jasper Croft and Elias's land. The theft accusation wasn't the plot. It was the diversion. We need those documents back, Adeline said. Before he does whatever he's planning to do with them. Where would he keep them? Elias asked. His hotel room, Adeline said, already moving toward the door, toward the horses, toward whatever came next. It has to be his hotel room. Adeline. I know him, Elias. She turned back, fierce, certain in a way she'd never once felt certain of anything under Silas's roof. I know how he thinks. I know how he hides things. Let me do this. Elias studied her for a long moment. Something in his face shifting, from protective instinct towards something closer to trust. Together, he said. Not alone. Never alone against him again. Adeline nodded, and something in her chest, some old fear finally loosening its grip, after 3 long years, let go just a little more. Together, she agreed. The Larkspur Hollow Hotel had exactly 9 rooms, and Silas, predictably, had taken the finest of them, a corner suite on the 2nd floor, with a view of the street below. Getting inside wasn't difficult. Sarah Voss, whose brother worked the front desk, mentioned in passing, over supper that Mr. Prescott had gone to Denver for 2 days on business, leaving that very morning. It felt, Adeline thought, almost too convenient. Which should have warned her. Later, she would understand that it should have warned her. But that evening, standing outside room 7, with Elias beside her, and a passkey borrowed under a pretense Sarah's brother hadn't questioned too closely, all Adeline felt was the electric, terrified certainty of a woman finally taking back something that had been stolen from her for years. Not just money. Not just land. Control over her own story. The room was tidy. Silas had always been tidy, meticulous even in his cruelty. A trunk sat at the foot of the bed, locked. A writing desk held neat stacks of correspondence. There, Elias said, moving to the desk, lifting a leather folder from beneath a stack of letters. This looks official. Adeline crossed to him, hands trembling as she opened it. Inside were the missing survey documents. Original filings, dated 9 years prior, Elias's signature clear at the bottom, the boundary lines marked precisely, as they'd always stood. Beneath them, a second document. Newer. A draft, in a different hand, redrawing the same boundary lines several hundred yards east, cutting directly through the creek that fed Elias's water access. And beneath that a letter. Unfinished, unsent, in Silas's cramped, familiar hand. Mr. Croft. As discussed, the original filing will be quietly amended before return, ensuring your revised boundary stands unchallenged once the Hartwell claim is voided for procedural error. In exchange for the agreed sum, I trust this matter will be considered settled between us, and that my cousin's situation regarding her father's estate will no longer require further. The letter ended there. Mid-sentence. He's been planning this for weeks, Adeline breathed. Before he even arrived. This was never about the estate at all. It was always about this. We have him, Elias said, voice low, fierce with something that had been building for weeks, and finally found its target. This proves everything. The conspiracy, the fraud, all of it. Adeline began gathering the papers, hands shaking with adrenaline, and something close to triumph. And that was, when the door opened behind them. Silas stood in the frame. Not in Denver. Never in Denver. Watching them with an expression of cold, quiet satisfaction, like a man who had laid a trap and simply waited patiently for the exact right moment to close it. Well, he said softly. There you both are. Breaking into a man's hotel room. How very lawful of you. Silas. Adeline started. Save it, he said, and his voice had dropped every pretense of warmth now, every trace of the concerned cousin mask stripped away to reveal what had always lived underneath it. You've just handed me exactly what I needed. What are you talking about? He smiled. The smile she'd spent 3 years learning to fear. Breaking and entering, he said. Theft of legal documents mid-dispute. Witnessed by the hotel clerk, who I made quite certain saw you both come up these stairs. He stepped further into the room, blocking the doorway entirely. I'll admit, I hoped you'd take longer to find them. But this works just as well. Better even. You planned this, Elias said, voice dangerous and low. You left the papers here on purpose. I planned a great many things, Mr. Hartwell. Silas's eyes moved to Adeline, cold and satisfied. You were always predictable, cousin. Give you a lock to pick, and you'll pick it, given enough desperation and enough time. I only had to wait. Adeline's stomach dropped, the leather folder clutched hard against her chest, understanding crashing over her in a cold, sickening wave. She had walked directly into exactly the trap he'd built for her. Again. Give me the documents, Silas said, holding out his hand, calm now, utterly certain of his position. Or I'll have the sheriff up here, within the hour, to witness exactly what you're holding, and exactly how you came to be holding it. Outside the window, snow had started falling again, thick and silent, burying the street below in soft, deceptive white. Adeline looked at the folder in her hands. At the proof of everything, real proof, finally, undeniable proof, sitting right there in her grip. And at Silas, standing in the doorway, smiling, already 3 moves ahead, exactly the way he had always been 3 moves ahead, for as long as she had known him. No, she said. Silas's smile flickered. No, I'm not giving you anything, Adeline said, and her voice, impossibly, did not shake. Not this time. Adeline. A warning now, low and hard. Think very carefully about what you're. I have thought carefully, she said. For 3 years, I thought carefully about every word, every movement, every held breath, trying to survive you. I am done thinking carefully around you, Silas. I would rather you drag me to that sheriff's office right now, tonight, than hand this back, and let you disappear it forever. Something shifted in Silas's face. The calm cracking, just slightly, replaced by something colder, more dangerous, the particular fury of a man watching his careful plan meet unexpected resistance. He stepped forward. Elias moved instantly, placing himself between them, solid as the fence post standing against Colorado wind. Touch her, Elias said very quietly, and you'll learn exactly what kind of man buried his sister, and swore never to let it happen again. For a long, taut moment, nobody moved. Snow ticked softly against the window glass. Somewhere below, in the street, a dog barked once, and fell silent. Then Silas stepped back, straightened his coat, composed his face, into something almost pleasant again, though his eyes remained flat and cold. Fine, he said. Keep your stolen papers, cousin. Enjoy them tonight. He moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. One final knife slid in soft and precise. But documents can be lost again just as easily as they were found. And accidents out here on the frontier happen so very easily to people who make themselves inconvenient. He left without another word, boots echoing down the hotel stairs, leaving the door standing open behind him, cold air pouring in from the hallway. Adeline stood frozen, the folder clutched against her chest, Silas's final words settling over her like the snow outside, soft and silent, and utterly without mercy. Elias, she whispered. That sounded like a threat. It was a threat, Elias said grimly, already moving to close and lock the door, though the danger had already walked out through it. Which means we're out of time to be careful. We take these documents to Kettering. Tonight. Before Silas has a chance to twist tonight's events into something that lands you in a cell instead of him. Adeline nodded, heart still hammering, hands still trembling around the folder that held, finally, undeniably, the truth. But underneath the fear, something else had taken root. Something steadier. Something that had been growing since the moment she squeezed the rifle trigger and hit exactly what she aimed at. She was not the frightened girl who had once counted stairs in the dark. She had found the proof herself. She had stood in a doorway and told a man who had terrorized her for years exactly, precisely, no. Whatever came next Whatever Silas and Croft still had waiting in the dark corners of their plan, Adeline Hartwell intended to meet it standing. Outside, the snow kept falling, blanketing Larkspur Hollow in white, hiding the hard, frozen ground beneath. But underneath it, spring was already coming. Slow. Certain. Unstoppable. Just like her. Sheriff Kettering's office smelled of coffee gone bitter, and wood smoke and the particular cold that clung to boots after a long ride through snow. Adeline sat the folder down on his desk like it might explode. Because in a way, it already had. Start from the beginning, Kettering said. Slow. So she did. The survey documents. The forged boundary line. The unfinished letter to Jasper Croft, his name written plain as day, plain as sin, right there in Silas's own cramped hand. Kettering read it twice. Set it down. Rubbed his jaw like the words had left a taste. This is a hanging offense in some places, he said quietly. Fraud against a federal land claim. Not hanging here, Elias said. No, Kettering agreed. But it's prison. Real prison. Which means Silas Prescott isn't going to sit still and let this reach a judge. Adeline's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Means a cornered man gets dangerous, Kettering said. Especially one who's spent his whole life thinking he's smarter than everyone around him. He looked at her, steady, careful. You should go home. Lock your doors. Let me handle the rest from here. No, Adeline said. Immediate. Reflexive. Surprising even herself with how fast it came. Adeline. I found this, she said. I walked into that hotel room. I stood in front of him and told him no. I am not going home to hide behind a locked door, while other people decide what happens next with my own life. Not again. Never again. Kettering glanced at Elias, silent, weighing. Elias didn't argue. He should have. Some part of her braced for it, old habit, old fear, waiting for a man's voice to override hers the way voices always had. It didn't come. She's right, Elias said instead. Quiet. Certain. This is her fight as much as mine. Maybe more. Something in Adeline's chest loosened, just slightly. Just enough to breathe easier. Except relief never lasted long. Not in this story. Not with Silas still out there, somewhere, recalculating. 2 days passed in uneasy quiet. Snow kept falling, soft and constant, burying the road, into town under drift after drift. Elias rode the fence line each morning, rifle across his saddle now, jaw tight with a vigilance that hadn't existed a month ago. Adeline watched him go each time. Watched the door. Waited. Until the waiting became its own kind of exhausting. Because that was the thing nobody told you about fear. It didn't need a reason anymore. It just needed a habit. And 3 years under Silas's roof had taught her fear, as thoroughly as any lesson she'd ever learned. She was standing at the window on the third morning, coffee cooling in her hands, when Elias came back from the barn holding an envelope. Left on the porch, he said. No writer. Just there. Adeline's blood went cold before she even opened it. Because she knew, somehow, before she read a single word. The letter was short. Silas's cramped hand, but rougher now, less careful, like the man writing it had lost patience with pretending. Cousin. You've made your choice, and I've made mine. I intend to leave this territory before your sheriff's investigation concludes, and I have no intention of leaving empty-handed. There remains the small matter of your father's actual estate, which is, admittedly, worth rather more than I once claimed. I trust you'll see reason before I go. Meet me alone at the old mill on Larkspur Creek, tomorrow at dusk. Come without your husband, and this ends quietly. Bring him, and I promise you both, it will not end quietly at all. Adeline read it twice. Her hands weren't shaking. That surprised her more than the letter itself. He wants me alone, she said. Absolutely not, Elias said. Fast. Flat. Final. Elias. No. He crossed the room, took the letter from her hands, read it himself, jaw hardening with every line. This isn't a negotiation, Adeline. This is a man backed into a corner asking you to walk into a trap he's already built. I know that. Then you know we're not doing it his way. I do know that. She met his eyes steady. So we don't do it his way. We do it ours. That evening, they rode to Widow Prentice's homestead together, the three of them gathering around her kitchen table like conspirators, which, Adeline supposed, was exactly what they'd become. He wants me alone at the mill, Adeline said. Tomorrow at dusk. Then you're not going, Cornelia said immediately. I'm going, Adeline said. But not alone. And not on his terms. Elias laid the letter flat on the table. He's desperate. Which makes him predictable in one way, and dangerous in another. Desperate men either run or they lash out. With Silas, Adeline said slowly, it's never just one or the other. He'll try to talk his way out first. And if that fails, she swallowed. If that fails, he becomes someone else entirely. I've seen it happen. Once. The room went quiet. We bring Kettering, Elias said finally. Hidden. Close enough to move fast, far enough Silas doesn't see him, and bolt before we've got proof of whatever he's planning. And Jasper Croft? Cornelia asked. You think he's just going to sit this out, now that his forgery scheme's been found? Elias's jaw tightened. No, he said. I don't think that at all. Sheriff Kettering agreed to the plan reluctantly, and only after Adeline made it clear she was going, with or without his blessing. You're either helping me do this safely, she told him, standing in his office, with a directness that would have been unthinkable to her 3 months earlier, or you're letting me do it unsafely. Those are the only two choices on the table, Sheriff. Kettering studied her for a long moment. Something like respect crossing his weathered face. You've changed since October, he said. I've remembered who I was before October, Adeline corrected. There's a difference. The old mill sat at a bend in Larkspur Creek, half a mile from town, its will long since stilled, timbers gray and weathered with disuse. Snow had drifted deep against its northern wall, and the creek beneath the ice moved slow and dark, the only sound in a silence, so total it felt like the whole valley was holding its breath. Adeline arrived alone. Visibly alone. Because that was the plan. Elias and Kettering waited 50 yards back, hidden among the trees along the ridge, close enough to reach her in under a minute, far enough that Silas, watching from the mill, would see exactly what he'd asked for. A woman. Alone. Vulnerable. Except she wasn't vulnerable anymore. That was the part Silas hadn't accounted for. Couldn't account for, because the version of her he still carried in his mind had stopped existing somewhere around a rifle range, a mercantile confrontation, a hotel room, where she'd said no, and meant it. Dusk was settling fast, purple-gray light thinning toward dark, when Silas emerged from the mill's shadowed doorway. You came alone, he said. Something like surprise threading through his voice. I confess I expected your husband to insist otherwise. He wanted to, Adeline said. I told him this needed to be between us. That much, at least, was true. Silas studied her, wary now in a way she'd never seen from him before. The confidence still there, but thinner. Frayed at the edges. You've grown bold, he said. Colorado's done something to you. No, Adeline said. I've done something to myself. Colorado just gave me room to do it. Silas's mouth twitched, something between a smile and a wince. 3 weeks, Adeline said before he could speak again. That's how long, before you ever walked into Delaney's store and pretended to be surprised to find me. You'd already had those documents lifted from the county office. You were already here, weren't you? Already circling, before you ever let this town see your face. Something flickered across Silas's expression, caught out. A man in my position learns to gather what he needs before he announces himself, he said after a moment. There's nothing sinister in preparation. There's nothing honest in it either, Adeline said. Not the way you did it. I don't want this to end badly, he said. I never wanted that. Everything I did, the estate, the letters, coming out here, I did because I care what happens to you, Adeline. You've never understood that. You embezzled my father's money, Adeline said. You forged land documents, with a man trying to steal my husband's livelihood. You threatened me in a hotel room. Tell me again, Silas, exactly which part of that was care. Something cracked across his face. Fast. Ugly. There and gone. I gave you a home, he snapped. After your father died, when you had nowhere else to go, I took you in. You took me in, Adeline said, and you made every single day of it a lesson in fear. I spent 3 years counting stairs in the dark, so you wouldn't hear me breathing wrong. That is not a home, Silas. That was a cage with good furniture. For a moment either of them spoke. Wind moved through the bare trees along the creek, carrying the smell of snow and cold water. What do you want? Silas asked finally. Quiet. Different now. Something almost like defeat threading beneath the words. To ruin me? Is that it? To watch me hang for a boundary dispute? I want the truth, Adeline said. Filed with the sheriff. Signed by you. Every dollar you took, every document you forged, all of it, on the record, so no one else ever has to wonder what kind of man you really are. And if I refuse? Then Sheriff Kettering already has everything he needs from that hotel room, Adeline said. The only choice left to you, Silas, is whether you face this like a man who did something wrong and wants to make it right, or like a coward who runs until the running finally catches up with him. Either way, this ends. Day decides which version of you it ends as. Silas stared at her. Something working behind his eyes, some final calculation, some last search for an angle she hadn't already closed. He didn't find one. You were always smarter than I let you believe, he said finally, bitterness threading through something that might, in another man, have resembled admiration. No, Adeline said. I was always this smart. You just needed me to believe I wasn't. And that was, when the second rider appeared at the tree line. Because Silas hadn't come alone either. Jasper Croft rode into the clearing on a black gelding, 2 men flanking him, faces hard and unfamiliar, the kind of men hired for exactly the sort of work that didn't get written into contracts. Well, Croft said, voice carrying easily across the snow-hushed clearing. This is an interesting little gathering. Silas's face went pale. This isn't what we discussed, he said, low, urgent. No, Croft agreed pleasantly. What we discussed was you handling your cousin quietly, so this whole business never had to reach a courtroom. His eyes moved to Adeline, cold and assessing. Seems you failed rather spectacularly at that. Jasper. Save it. Croft dismounted, boots crunching in the snow, unhurried, a man entirely confident in his own advantage. I've got documents proving a boundary dispute sitting in a Denver courthouse. I've got a survey filed. What I don't have, Mr. Prescott, is patience for a partner who can't manage one frightened woman without turning it into a spectacle. I'm not frightened, Adeline said. Croft's eyes cut to her, something flickering there, mild surprise quickly smoothed over. No, he said slowly. I don't suppose you are, at that. Whatever you're planning, Adeline said, forcing her voice steady, though her heart hammered hard enough to feel it in her throat. It ends here. Sheriff Kettering already has the forged documents. Already has the letter naming you both. Something shifted in Croft's expression. Fast calculation. Then there's no reason to leave witnesses, he said, almost conversationally, like he was discussing weather instead of violence. The world narrowed to a single, terrible point. He means it. He actually means it. Elias. Elias, where are? Don't, a voice said from the tree line. Hard. Absolute. Elias stepped into the clearing, rifle raised, Kettering emerging beside him a heartbeat later, badge catching the last gray light of dusk. Sheriff's office. Kettering called out, voice carrying with practiced authority. Jasper Croft, Silas Prescott, you're both under investigation for fraud and conspiracy against a federal land claim. Whatever you're thinking about doing next, think harder. Croft's men shifted, hands drifting toward holsters, calculating odds. 3 against 3, Croft said softly, almost to himself. Interesting arithmetic. 4, Adeline said. Every head turned toward her. Because her hand had already found the small pistol Elias had given her weeks ago, the one she'd practiced with until her aim stopped shaking, and it was steady now, leveled, aimed exactly where a woman, who had learned to breathe out, before she squeezed knew precisely where to aim. I'd think harder than that, Mr. Croft, she said. I've gotten quite good with this. For a long, suspended moment, nobody moved. Snow ticked softly through bare branches. The creek murmured under its skin of ice. Then one of Croft's men, the younger of the two, lowered his hand from his holster entirely. Boss, he muttered. This ain't worth a noose. Croft's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked between Kettering's badge, Elias's rifle, and the steady, unwavering barrel in Adeline's hand. The arithmetic, apparently, no longer favored him. This isn't finished, Croft said, backing toward his horse. Not by half. It's finished enough for tonight, Kettering said. Jasper Croft, Silas Prescott. You're both coming with me. Now. Except Silas didn't come quietly. Because that was never his way. Not once, not ever, not in 3 years of careful cruelty dressed up as concern. As Kettering moved toward him, Silas's composure finally, completely shattered, the mask he'd worn, since the mercantile door first opened splitting apart to reveal the thing that had always lived underneath. You ungrateful, ruinous girl! He snarled, lunging not for Kettering, not for Elias, but for Adeline herself, hand closing hard around her wrist, the old grip, the familiar grip, the one that had haunted 3 years of her sleep. You will not do this to me! You will not! Let go of her! Elias's voice, low and terrible. She owes me! Silas hissed, twisting her wrist, and old pain flared bright, and immediate, old fear rising fast, and total, and for one suspended, terrifying second, Adeline was 19 again, back in Boston, back in the dark, back in a body that had learned to go very still, and wait for it to end. No. Not this time. She didn't go still. She drove her heel down hard onto his boot, twisted free with the strength Elias had spent months teaching her, without either of them quite calling it that, and stumbled backward, into Elias's waiting arm, breath ragged, wrist throbbing, but free. Elias moved past her in the same instant, and Silas found himself facing not a frightened cousin, but a rancher's fist, fast and precise, driving him back, into the snow, sprawled and stunned. Touch her again, Elias said, standing over him, voice quiet in a way that carried more weight than shouting ever could. And you'll find out exactly what happens to men who mistake my patience for permission. Kettering hauled Silas up by the collar, snapping iron cuffs around wrists that had spent 3 years learning exactly which bruises left marks and which didn't. Silas Prescott, Kettering said, you're under arrest. Fraud, conspiracy, and now assault, witnessed by 3 people who'll swear to it in front of any judge in this territory. Silas didn't fight it. Something in him had finally, visibly, broken. Adeline, he said, voice small now, stripped of every performance he'd ever worn. Adeline, please. Don't, she said. Quiet. Final. You don't get my name in your mouth like that anymore. Not ever again. They rode back to town in near silence, Kettering leading Silas, and a subdued, furious Croft toward the jail, Elias and Adeline following behind, snow falling soft and steady around them, the whole world hushed, and white and finally still. "Are you hurt?" Elias asked, once they'd fallen behind enough for privacy. "My wrist," Adeline admitted. "It'll bruise. But it's nothing. It's not nothing." He reached over, careful, gentle, took her hand in his, examining the reddened skin, with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. "I should have been faster. Should have." "You were exactly fast enough," Adeline said. "And I handled the rest myself." Elias looked at her then, really looked, something fierce and proud, and achingly soft moving across his face all at once. "You did," he said. "You really did." The days that followed moved fast, the way relief always seemed to once the worst of the danger had finally passed. Kettering's investigation, aided now by the documents from the hotel room and testimony from 3 witnesses at the mill, moved swiftly through legal channels. Silas confessed, eventually, once the weight of evidence made denial pointless, admitting to the embezzlement, the forged documents, the conspiracy with Croft to falsify the boundary survey in exchange for a share of the land's future value. Croft, wealthier and better lawyered, fought longer. But Ferris's testimony about the missing survey records, combined with the unfinished letter bearing Croft's name in Silas's own hand, left little room for a defense that held. By mid-January, both men awaited trial in the courthouse in Denver, the Larkspur Hollow jail having proven, in Kettering's dry words, "too small and too close to home for men who'd made this many enemies this fast." The rumors that had once trailed Adeline, through the mercantile, through church, through whispered conversations on porches, shifted entirely. Because a story about a woman accused of theft was, it turned out, far less compelling to a town's imagination than a story about a woman who'd walked alone, into a trap, armed with nothing but proof and steady hands, and walked back out having exposed a conspiracy that touched half the county's land claims. "You're something of a legend now," Sarah Voss told her one afternoon, pinning a new hem, with quick, practiced fingers. "Delaney's telling anyone who'll listen how you marched into that mercantile and told your own cousin no to his face." "I didn't do it for legend," Adeline said. "No," Sarah agreed. "That's probably why it worked." Cornelia Prentice came to the ranch on a bright, cold morning in early February, snow crusted hard, and glittering under a pale winter sun. She stood on the porch a long moment, before knocking, and when Adeline opened the door, something uncertain still lingered in the older woman's face. "I wanted to say something," Cornelia said. "Properly. Not just an apology tossed off in a moment of panic." "You don't owe me another apology," Adeline said. "You already gave me one, and I understood it." "I owe you this, at least." Cornelia's hands twisted in her apron, an old habit Adeline recognized now, as nervousness rather than mere fidgeting. "I've spent weeks turning it over, wondering how a kindness could nearly cost you everything. And I think I finally understand something. It wasn't the kindness that was the danger, Adeline. It was that I didn't know the man on the other end of it. I trusted an old friend's judgment about her own family, and I never thought to question whether her judgment might be wrong. None of us thought to question it," Adeline said gently. "I lived under his roof for 3 years, and still didn't fully understand what he was capable of, until I saw those documents myself. Still." Cornelia met her eyes steady now. "I want you to know I've learned something from it. That love and trust aren't the same as certainty. That sometimes the people we're trying to protect need us to ask more questions, not fewer." Adeline reached out, took the older woman's weathered hands in her own. "You saw my bruises before anyone else did," she said. "You gave me a place to be safe, before I even trusted myself enough to ask for one. Whatever came after, that part matters more than the mistake. It matters more than you know." Cornelia's eyes brightened with unshed tears. "You're a remarkable young woman," she said. "I hope you know that." "I'm learning too," Adeline said. "Every day, a little more." March brought the first true thaw, snow retreating in slow, dripping increments, revealing dark earth, and the first stubborn green shoots pushing up along the fence lines. Adeline stood on the porch one morning, coffee warm in her hands, watching Elias work the horses in the corral, breath fogging in the cool morning air. "You've got a look about you," he said, catching her watching, a smile tugging at his mouth, as he approached. "Do I? Like you're thinking something you haven't said yet." She considered that. Considered how to shape 3 years of fear, and 3 months of slowly, painfully rebuilding herself, into words that wouldn't dissolve the moment she tried to speak them. "I keep thinking about all the women who wrote those letters," she said finally. "The matrimonial advertisements. Women like me, running from something, hoping a stranger's ranch might be safer than the roof they were under." She looked at him. "Some of them won't be as lucky as I was, Elias. Some of them will end up with men far worse than the ones they fled." Elias's expression sobered, understanding dawning. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet," Adeline admitted. "Something. A way to help. A way for women like me to have somewhere to land that isn't just hope, and a letter, and a 1,400-mile gamble." She paused. "Cornelia's house is too small for what I'm imagining. But this ranch, with the new wing you keep talking about building." Understanding bloomed across his face, slow and warm. "A safe house," he said. "For women fleeing what you fled. Something like that. I don't have it fully formed. But I keep thinking, if Cornelia hadn't seen my bruises, if she hadn't known what to look for, I don't know that I would have found the courage to tell you the truth, as fast as I did. Someone taught her to recognize it. I want to be that for someone else." Elias set down the bridle he'd been holding, crossed the yard, took her free hand in his. "Then we build it," he said simply. "Whatever it takes. However long it takes." "You'd do that? Take on more risk, more scrutiny, after everything that just happened with Croft?" "Adeline." His voice was quiet, certain, the same voice that had promised her safety on a snow-driven night 4 months earlier, a promise that had, since been tested, and had held. "I buried my sister, because there was no one, no house, no door standing open, when she needed one. If we can be that door for even one woman, who needs it, that's not a risk. That's the entire reason any of this matters." Adeline felt her eyes burn, felt something in her chest swell too large for her ribs to comfortably hold. "I love you," she said, simple and unadorned, the truest sentence she'd ever spoken. "I don't think I've said that plainly enough, often enough." "You've said it in 100 ways," Elias said, drawing her close, resting his forehead against hers. "But I'll never tire of hearing it plainly, too." The trial in Denver concluded in late April. Silas received 7 years for fraud and embezzlement, the assault charge adding further weight to a sentence the judge called, in his closing remarks, a mercy compared to what men have received for lesser cruelties, extended only because the court recognizes a broken life rarely repairs itself through further breaking. Jasper Croft, better lawyered but no less guilty, received 5 years, and the forced dissolution of every land claim built on the falsified survey. His empire, once spanning half the county, contracted overnight into something far smaller, far less certain of its own permanence. Adeline read the verdict in a letter, from Kettering, standing on the porch of the ranch house in the golden light of a Colorado spring evening, Elias beside her, the mountains catching the day's last color like something out of a painting neither of them had words fine enough to describe. She folded the letter closed. Set it down. "It's over," she said. Quiet. Testing the words the way she'd tested so many words these past months, waiting to see if they'd hold weight, or crumble the moment she leaned on them. They held. "It's over," Elias agreed. The verdict had given them peace of mind. What came after would give them something more permanent than peace. By June, the new wing of the ranch house stood framed, and half finished, timber pale and raw against the older, weathered boards of the original structure. Adeline walked through it most evenings, imagining rooms that didn't exist yet, beds that would someday hold women who'd made journeys not unlike her own, frightened and uncertain, and desperately hoping the letter they'd answered led somewhere safer than the place they'd left. Cornelia had already offered to help. So had Sarah Voss, and even Thomas Delaney, who'd taken to setting aside donated fabric and supplies at the mercantile, without being asked. Word's getting around, Sarah told her one afternoon, delivering a bundle of quilts stitched by women across 3 different counties. There's a woman in Cheyenne, apparently, who's heard about what you're building. Wrote to ask if there'd be room for her sister. Adeline held the quilts against her chest, throat tight. Tell her yes, she said. Tell her there will always be room. On a warm evening in late June, nearly 9 months since a frightened woman had stepped off a stagecoach clutching a small valise, and a fistful of careful lies about how well her journey had gone, Adeline stood on the porch beside her husband, watching the sun drop slow and gold behind the mountains. Do you remember? Elias asked. The first thing I said to you? At the stagecoach? You said my name, Adeline said. Like a question. I did. Because I didn't know yet what kind of woman had answered my letters. Didn't know if I'd find someone broken beyond repair, or someone simply tired, or... He shook his head. I didn't expect you, Adeline. I want you to know that. I didn't expect to find someone who'd end up teaching me as much about courage as I ever taught you about rifles. Adeline leaned into him, the solid warmth of him, the safety that had never once, not for a single day, felt like a cage. I didn't expect any of this either, she said. Not the ranch. Not the trial. Not the women, who are going to sleep in rooms we haven't even finished building yet. She looked up at him. I only hoped for shelter, Elias. I never dared hope for a home. And I certainly never dared hope I'd become someone capable of building shelter for others. You always were, Elias said quietly. You just needed the chance to prove it to yourself. The sun dropped below the ridge line, spilling the last of its light across the prairie in long, amber ribbons. Somewhere behind them, in the unfinished wing of the house, timber creaked softly, as it settled, the sound of something new taking shape, slow and patient, the way anything worth building always did. Adeline thought of the girl, who had once counted 14 stairs in the Boston dark, learning to move silent, learning to disappear inside her own home just to survive it. That girl felt very far away now. Not erased. Never erased, not entirely, some scars simply didn't work that way. But transformed. Carried forward into something sturdier. Something that had learned to load a rifle, and breathe out, before squeezing, that had learned to say no, and mean it, that had walked alone, into a trap, and walked back out having sprung it on the men who'd built it. Adeline Hartwell, Elias said softly, testing her married name the way he sometimes did in quiet moments, like he still couldn't quite believe his own good fortune. Elias Hartwell, she answered, testing something back, the shape of 2 names finally, fully, belonging to each other. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that asked nothing and promised everything, and Adeline closed her eyes and let herself simply feel it. The warmth, the safety, the astonishing, unhurried peace of a life she had built, with her own 2 hands, out of fear transformed into courage, out of a stranger's letter transformed into a home. Behind them, the ranch house stood solid against the darkening sky, its unfinished wing waiting, patient, for the women still to come. And somewhere out on the prairie, the last light of day gave way, slow and gentle, to the first bright stars of a Colorado summer night. Home, Adeline thought, simply, completely, for the first time in her life believing the word all the way down to its roots. She was finally, fully, home.